Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar hosted by Multiplier in partnership with Intellect. My name is Sarhan, and I'll be your host for today's event. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them into the chat box on the right. We have a dedicated team member who will be happily answering your questions. Now, let me introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Firstly, we have Hiraash Thawfeek, CTO at Multiplier. Alongside him, we have Dr. Oliver Suendermann, VP of Clinical at Intellect. Hiraash, could you give a short introduction of yourself and your role at Multiplier, please?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. Very nice to be here today. I'm heading technology at Multiplier. Multiplier is a young company relatively. I've joined at the early days and, worked together to build the team and the product that Multiplier offers today over the past couple of years. It's Multiplier is been in the sort of the global employment space, and the product that they're built is one of its kind to enable companies, employers to be able to compliantly hire and be able to manage employees without having to worry about the nuances of having teams across multiple countries. So our mandate, our vision has always been to enable this, ability for employers to be able to, have a global team, and also employees or individuals to be able to find, great companies that they want to work with, no matter where they are.
Thank you, Hiraash. Oliver, could you please explain a bit about your role at Intellect and what it is they do?
Of course. Thank you, first of all, for having me, and hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Oliver. I'm the VP Clinical at Intellect. Intellect is a Singapore headquartered Asian company. We're a modern mental health company with very high ambitions. We want to make mental health care accessible to everyone and everywhere in Asia, but we have also global ambitions. But we're currently focused on Asia. We are truly a science-backed end-to-end platform. Omni-channel platform. So we have self-care content I'll talk about later that is evidence-based, that helps people with everyday mental health challenges, anything work-related, mood in the workplace, anxiety, and so on. We help employees to match intelligently with coaches and counselors who can help them as well with their goals. And we have, for the higher touch clinical needs as well, we have therapists and psychiatrists, and we have a 24/7 hyper-localized helpline as well. So all our providers are localized, so we're available in 20 plus languages in 22 countries or more now, I think. And we are accessible via the app, via our tech platform, web-based, but we also have in-person clinics and crisis support. And we currently serve just over 3 million members globally, very excited to be here.
Thank you, Oliver. Thanks for the introduction. With the introductions done, let's move into today's topic, Global Expansion 2.0 with the people-centric approach. In today's ever-evolving business landscape, the need for a people-centric approach when it comes to global expansion has never been more crucial. It's more than about just hiring the right talent. It is about creating an environment that nurtures success regardless of the geographical boundaries. We'll be exploring more strategies and best practices to ensure that your global teams thrive in this dynamic environment. With that said, let's jump into the questions. Dr. Suendermann, from an HR wellbeing policy perspective, what strategies can companies implement to support the success of the global teams?
Yeah, it's a great question, because in order to help employees with better mental health, or to develop better mental health, you need to really affect policy change, and you need to kind of incorporate well-being in the fabric of the company, right? What I mean by that is that in order to give the best possible mental health support to your employees, you want to cover two things. You want to cover proactive mental health care, so just like going to the gym or eating healthily, you want your employees to have access to proactive mental health care so that they can in their own time, develop their mental health positive habits, whether that's, better sleeping schedules, whether that's, giving feedback effectively in their teams. So help them to become more resilient, but you also want the reactive care, which is, life is complicated and we do struggle at times, because of things that happen in our families or the workplace. So you also want reactive care where employees can easily access a helpline, to see a therapist or a coach or counselor. So in order to mandate that, you really need to have a policy for that makes, puts well-being right at the center of HR policies. So what that means is that, managers, people leaders in your company, ideally have the well-being of their teams as KPIs. Okay, so that the managers get evaluated based on how mentally well, how resilient teams are. So at Intellect, for example, we help companies to screen workforces for the proactive needs of mental health I just spoke about, but also for the reactive needs. And we make holistic, personalized recommendations what employees can do. And if that is not mandated from a policy angle, you're unlikely going to see much uptake. So that's one. And the other thing is that you want to have a policy that continues the engagement of employees around mental health as well. That could be webinars, that could be workshops. Later on, I'll touch a bit more around mental health first aid. So ideally, your managers and people leaders understand how to understand mental health, and they know what it looks like when employees struggle, especially in the remote setting, right? How do you know if you see someone on a Zoom camera, if they're not their usual selves, and how do you have a conversation in a safe way? All those things, you need to give resources, but you also need to continue the engagement around those resources, and you need a proper well-being strategy that is top-down. I strongly believe that in order to lift up the employees, the workforce's well-being, you need to have a proper org strategy that is led by ideally the CEO and the leadership, and they need to drive the engagement around those. And because employees are not going to use mental health resources if the leaders are not advocating for it or not using it themselves. So yeah, in a nutshell, I'd say, change comes from the top, and you have policies that bring end-to-end, ideally science-backed solutions around mental health to the employees, and then continue to advocate for it. I think that will set up global teams for success. And then you have to, be data-driven as well, and constantly kind of track whether what you're doing actually lifts up the mental health and leads to then the changes in the metrics that companies care about, be it productivity, retention of talent, turnover intention, and so on.
Thank you, Oliver. So talking about strategies for companies, what are some self-care strategies that employees could undertake, and incorporate into their routine for their own well-being?
It's another great question. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. We have hundreds of modules on our app, and I invite everyone in the audience. You can access us on the Play Store or the App Store as well. We have obviously a premium version as well, but we have a free version. You can have a look. But basically, self-care. I mean, there's so many things you can do, and you have to. There's no one size fits all. For some people, it's just developing better sleep schedules. For others, it's a meditation. Myself, I just recently discovered journaling. Gratitude journaling works quite well for me, where I mostly fail, but I try every day to just for a couple of minutes to write down what I'm grateful for, be it my kids or something that happened at work. And that can really lift up mood as well. But like I said, there's many things out there. If you have anxiety or you struggle with mood, you may benefit from more sort of therapy-focused self-care strategies. So if you're very negative in your thinking, you're very self-critical, we have content as well, which we evaluated in studies that's proven to be quite effective, that helps people, for example, to like their bodies more, to be more self-compassionate towards their bodies, or to develop generally more positive ways of thinking, and so on and so on. So yeah, I think you need to first do an easy, quite straightforward self-assessment. So we have, for example, a personal insights quiz on our app. That's just 26 short questions that ask you about your well-being, and then we make recommendations, and then we'll give people some self-care strategies that work best for, based on the answers they've given us. So yeah, just some ideas, but I can probably talk a lot longer on this. But generally, you have to find what works for you, and technology is a wonderful thing that helps with nudges and gamifying those self-care tools as well to sustain the engagement, because it's quite difficult. Humans are creatures of habit. It's very hard for us to really change and introduce new habits in our busy schedules. So yeah, just some ideas here.
Hiraash, any strategies, self-care tips that you would give, given that you've been managing a global team? What would you suggest?
Yeah. Actually, if I may, I would like to circle back a little bit on what Dr. Suendermann mentioned earlier on. On the. So I think you made some amazing points there. Could you share a little bit about what sort of metrics, in terms of mental health care, that you could highlight, that managers could use to sort of identify what could they look for, what could they what could be actually be tracked, or if it's not tracking, then what mechanisms?
Thank you. It's a great question. Yeah. So the quiz I just mentioned, which is for employees, right? We do aggregate that data in a confidential way for people leaders on a quite visually nice sort of dashboard. Of course, the individual data is anonymized, but for managers, they can see on a department or team level, for example, burnout risk, because we have a question on burnout, or we ask about anxiety or stress. So we do allow HR to slice the data by team according to these various metrics. So that allows HR or people leader to be a bit more strategic how they want to allocate support or resources. So if for example, that your sales team has a high burnout risk, then surely you should consider, how can you train managers to support their teams more effectively with their mental health, right? So these are just some ideas, but we have very high level, we aggregate the data further, and so we give companies, organizations, sort of an aggregate score on the employee well-being, organizational support as well. So we do ask as well, how much do you support the company? Do you feel, you can talk about mental health in your company, those metrics as well, and workplace engagement, of course, as well. And then we give a total organizational score, health score as well. And again, sliced by team, and then you can be more strategic in how you support your teams.
Oh, that's great. So these are largely all survey-based, if I'm not wrong. Is that right? Or do we use any other mechanisms to identify potential, mental health, issues?
Yeah. So what I just shared about is self-reported data through the quizzes and the app utilization or the platform utilization. But we have a client success team, of course, and we do work quite closely with the HR teams. And we can also look at, HR data as well to see whether, from the time of onboarding Intellect, whether you've seen changes in, resignations or promotions, and, more, I'd say more hard data, right, that is accessible to HR, but that is not on our app at the moment. But we can correlate it if HR is interested to, identify those success metrics.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think this is, we are living in an age where I think mental health requires quite a bit of attention, like mental well-being rather, especially with, going through COVID, and then, people adapting more and more remote style of working. I think it's taken time for teams, individuals to sort of adapt into the right healthy sort of structure in work, right? Which leads to all these, unhealthy practices that we do. And I think we'll probably talk more in detail about this. I think some of the, I think the number of things that we as, leaders or managers, people managers have to do to make sure that they can, like I think you very well put, like proactively identify and then also they can have some ways to do it. I mean, obviously, one of the things that I think I would mandate, even in a having a very close relationship with your team members, is becomes interestingly more important in a remote setting than even in a in a physical setting,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, agreed. Human connection, right, is of course is one of the most important things for our mental
Yeah.
health. And I should, let's be honest, I mean, self-care is amazing and great if we can nail it and get into good routines, but it only is going to go so far. What is equally or maybe more important is the relationship we have with our managers and our colleagues. And in a remote setting, the companies need to pay particular attention and be particular purposeful about how they nurture relationships in their teams, right? And there's many things, and I think we're going to touch on some of those later as well. But of course, if you have a difficult relationship with your manager, self-care is not really going to cut it. Then, you know, but it's an important pillar, and it's more in your control, whereas it's even less in your control who you have as your bosses, right, or your colleagues. So self-care helps us to, you know, develop healthier ways of reacting or relating to people, but may not help us so much in, like, you know, changing our bosses. Although, you know, we can dive more into that
Yeah,
later
very
for sure.
interesting. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, guys. So, talking about global expansion and, global remote teams, Hiraash, could you shed some light on, the legal and compliance issues that might pop up when a company is trying to hire people from on a global scale?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hiring, going global is one of the most powerful things that companies have today, especially when you have the technology, the ability to sort of work across borders much easier than we used to sometime decades back, let's say. I remember the era of when Skype became a thing, and then suddenly you could work with people across the world with a lot of ease, right? So I mean, we are today in a far better place, right, in terms of technology. We're working remotely or working globally is so much possible, but then the limitation. Then suddenly the limitation comes. A lot of companies still feel, a lot of employers still feel that they cannot expand so easily. And one of the reasons is compliance, regulatory, or even local labor law. Basically, largely a compliance one. So, what does it take, right? What it takes to basically have this, right? If you are trying to expand and having a team in another country, there's a lot to take into consideration. From, like I mentioned, local employment laws, and they can be pretty crazy. Country to country, they can be very different. We live in a region, the Southeast Asian region, where you see countries are so diverse from one to another. Philippines to Vietnam to Indonesia, so close to each other, but so different in terms of how they operate, I think, culturally and even in law. You find so, and these kind of labor laws can be pretty complicated, right? Like, for example, Vietnam requires like a 13-month mandated sort of bonus, which may be an alien idea to a company coming from the West. Then you have similar ideas in Europe and also Latin in certain countries. Then you'll have, like, when it comes to contracts, employment contracts, the language, the requirements within contracts are very nuanced, a lot of details. Some countries require multilingual, like if you take France, in Spain, and a lot of European countries require multilingual contracts. Otherwise, they are not compliant, which is interesting, right? You would just think that it's just ease of use. No, it's not. Then you have, like, certain countries require wet signatures. So today we have gotten used to so much of online signatures, e-signatures, electronic signatures, which actually are not legally valid in certain countries. And then you have some other sort of behavioral aspects of it, where you usually a contract is only valid if two parties sign them. But in an employment contract in the UK, if an employee signs a contract, it's considered valid. So how do so knowing a lot of these nuances and navigating them are virtually impossible, right? I mean, you need help. I think that's just purely talking about employment law. And then there is the aspect of working eligibility to work, tax obligations to even things like works classification. Different countries classify employment in different ways, like who can be hired as a permanent full-time employee, in what are the requirements to be able to do that, and then you have who can be contractors and what are the classifications of that, right? So that you can make sure you are hiring compliantly and not breaking law in that local country. So when it comes to expanding into another country, these are the challenges that organizations would face, and it suddenly becomes a major barrier to sort of navigate into that, right? This is complicated. I don't want to take any risk, so I don't want to break compliance, so I would rather stay out of it, right? This is one of the biggest barriers that we need to break today, and Multiplier's mandate being, pushing into enabling companies to be able to get through this, right? So yeah, those are some of the considerations.
Got it. Thanks, Hiraash. Let's say a company is managed to hire globally. How do they ensure that the onboarding process for the new employees are seamless, given that it's not an on-site situation anymore and it's more of a remote setting? So how can this be tackled?
Right. So I think onboarding is where I think that we can break this into two aspects. One is this whole HR operational aspect of the onboarding, which I've been talking about earlier, which involves your compliance, making sure you send out the right contract, make sure that the onboarding process of the compliance requirement is taken care of. For example, giving the right amount of leaves as mandated by the law, the right amount, the clauses in the contract, etc. So this is the part where Multiplier actually really solves the problem well, where you can just quickly within minutes generate a contract for somebody that you want to hire in any part of the world, in any country, and and just being able to do that compliantly without with any struggle, and not having to actually learn what these complications are, and just simply by the click of a few clicks, being able to generate that contract and send it across, and also not being able to worry about the behavioral and the process related aspects of it, right? So which is where our platform comes into play, where HR folks in companies can simply go in, onboard anybody from any country, by just putting in the details and getting them signed on the platform. Wherever the complications are, our team will make sure that the technology of it will take care of it, and if not requires, we have the people who will get involved to make sure that is done as well. So that is, and make sure that they have everything they need to get started with that. And like I said, like each country has its nuances, and a lot of the time, for example, even if you're negotiating salaries to somebody you want to hire, what is a norm, right? Not only about the numbers, but also, is it a norm to negotiate? Is it a norm, to suggest certain things, right? In some countries, certain things can be offensive. Like sometimes if you negotiate, they may feel offended, right? So knowing these things is very difficult, right? So we are integrating contextual information inside the platform in Multiplier also to make sure that we make the right choices in the right places. So we are working through some of these things. So that is the operational aspect. Now, once you get somebody through that, they sign the contract, the next aspect comes where we make sure they are onboarded to their work and culturally onboarded into the company, right? And they're fitting it up. And now that in a remote setting or a global setting, there are aspects that I think one of the important factors is that we make sure there is a good mix of async and synchronous sort of onboarding in place. So it requires quite a bit of structure to make sure that we have the right resources. So if you are, for example, when we are onboarding engineers, so we have engineers in more than 10 countries today in Multiplier. And we're making sure that to onboard them, we have a series of sort of tasks for managers, for leads, and for the individuals who are joining the team members, that they can go through in their onboarding process to complete. And as part of this, we have we ensure calendar events are put in place so that they can join certain sessions, and also provide them pre-recorded sessions that they can listen to in a good mix. I mean, doing a complete doing the complete recording, basically asynchronous sort of onboarding also wouldn't be great for somebody who is joining for the first time, and they have to listen to just a bunch of videos, right? So you have to make sure that you have presence and make sure they feel welcome, they feel special, right? I mean, every team member needs to feel that way so that they can actually be excited about joining your company and working with you. I think so that is a very important part. So there is that aspect to it, to make sure that there is the cultural alignment, motivation, and the culture is really sort of landed really well with them as you go through the onboarding, and you're taking the right efforts to do that. Yeah, those are some of the things that I could share. Or maybe, I don't know, Dr. Suendermann, if you have any aspects on the cultural side of things.
I think thank you, Hiraash. Very, very comprehensive. I mean, you want to, in the life cycle of the employment, ideally at the earliest stage, include a mental health assessment, or at least give access to mental health screening, so that early on, employees who may have some struggles can get help. And of course, I strongly believe, and that's also what our data shows, if companies have comprehensive mental health benefits, such as the ones I laid out earlier, right? I do think at the onboarding stage, that is also where you want to, really help the individual employee to understand what's in stock, what they can do, where to reach out to, and because it's actually in the best interest of the organization as well, because we know employees who feel supported, they're going to be more loyal to the company, but also if they're mentally more resilient and healthier, they're going to be more productive, and they're going to be more effective and happier employees. So yeah, ideally at the onboarding stage, that's also where you want to emphasize the mental health benefits and give access.
Right. Thanks, all. Talking about distributed teams, what would you say are some of the steps that people managers can actively promote and support their team members' mental well-being?
Okay, I'll take this first. So there's a couple of things. So first of all, a good people leader, in my view, is someone who understands mental health and is trained in mental health literacy, because they'll help them to spot when their employees, especially excuse me, in a remote setting, if they're struggling. So, for example, mental health first aid is a wonderful evidence-based training which Intellect now offers. We're the sole licensee in Singapore, and we can deliver it in the region as well, which is a structured, very practical mental health first aid program. Just like learning to give first aid when someone has a heart attack. The same goes for if someone is in crisis. You want to, especially remotely, you want to pick up on those signs and know how to have a good conversation, a safe conversation, and signpost. So that's the first thing. I do think managers should be trained in mental health first aid. Secondly, there's all sorts of other things managers can do. You can have a mental health sort of off day once a year or once a quarter or every half year. You should have, we spoke about human connection earlier. That is very conducive to mental well-being. So be very purposeful in setting up things like trivia nights and get purposeful engagement activities where you get people out of the work mindset into the bonding part. And there's all sorts of things, of course, you can do. So, but you need to have HR support you with that and schedule it and make it okay to come off work for an hour to participate in those. I think just be very, very strategic about those. And the elephant in the room, I guess, is that you need to have the resources in place in the first place. So that goes without saying. And if you do have those end-to-end, resources in place, then you raise awareness, and there's all sorts of challenges you could do. Mental health challenges, just like in Singapore we had a STEP challenge. Why not do a mental well-being challenge? Get the team into meditation practices, or whatever works for the team. Ideally, you are employee-led, and you ask your teams. They probably have a very good idea what's good for their mental well-being, and listen to them and then implement those. But I'd say the mental health first aid is a very, very important, very effective way to train up managers' skills in well-being and mental health literacy. I don't know, Hiraash, what do you think from your angle?
You've covered it pretty well, Oliver. I think absolutely right. I had pretty much the same thoughts in terms of, I think one thing that you miss in the remote setting is that human connection, and it tends to be, I think we have something written down in our sort of internal notes is that very naturally remote work turns into transactional, right? There is a sort of a synonymity towards those two things, right? Because it's very easy. You just talk to people when you have to, and then you don't when you don't have to, which creates this kind of transactional nature to it, which I think we have to consciously avoid, and managers have to take steps to make sure that there are things that are to create personal relationships. One thing that happens when you're meeting people frequently, you go out for a beer, or just hang out. The water cooler conversations do actually help, right? Important decisions are made next to the water cooler, right? So I think this is something you miss in a remote setting. So managers have to take effort to create that environment consciously. So I think sessions, like sometimes, I think you made some good points, bring them back to office, or have events outside. But in some cases, when you're global and your teams are distributed pretty widely, it becomes impossible. Like we have similar situations that we have encountered. Like we've had pockets of these events happen, but then we've never been able to get people really together, everybody together. So in these cases, like we just had last week like a Halloween trivia party, where we had some dress ups, people guessing games and stuff like this, right? So it was pretty interesting, and I think that is at a broad level, but I think it's about that human connection where you are able to actually create relationships where you really know one another. This is where really things move well. You're able to work with people. You don't have to second guess what people are saying or understand. Try to take time to understand. When you really know a person, their personality, what they do, what they're like in their in their life, what they do and what they think, everything else becomes simpler, right? So establishing more, like you said, right, people being able to connect at a human level and also have personal relationships as much as possible, have ways to create those personal relationships, and managers obviously having that personal relationship with their team members, right? Having most one-on-ones far more important in the remote setting. Have that time, not just to talk about work, but also to just say how you really have a fixed allocated time to really talk about how one and each other are doing and how their relationship is going, right? I think it all stems from that human relationship, like you said, right?
Agree. And to be purposeful, just to add one thing to and I agree with everything you said, Hiraash, as well as the connection, right? But when managers meet with their reports or their employees, right, it's easy for the manager or for everybody really to say, how are you doing? And if you do that in a if you do this in a sort of, kind of very rushed way, you may miss how they're actually doing. So what I have learned when I was taking over more managerial duties as a people leader as well, every meeting I have, one-to-one meeting I have with my team members, is about their well-being. We actually we have a mini survey our employees fill out on what's their current well-being, what's their work stress, what are their their highs and lows from the week, and we really make it about how are you doing, really about them, and not rush that. Because if you rush it, you may really miss if something is going on. And especially in a remote work setting, this is more challenging, because if you're in the same room, it's maybe a little bit easier, right, to pick up on, how they present, how the employee presents and whether they're a little bit different. But so it's very important. as I said, earlier about fun activities on the side. We also do at Intellect, we do virtual coffee chats as well, especially when people join the company. So today we had a few people onboarded today, and they first of all they fill up the week with virtual coffee chats, so they get to know everybody. And and I do think it's a generally very good practice to keep up. But yeah, be purposeful, make it a priority, write it down, and really check in with your folks how they're doing.
Yeah. No, great points. Yeah, for sure.
Good. Thanks, all. Thanks, Hiraash. Moving towards the final question, guys. With the shift towards remote and a global workforce, how do you perceive the evolving role of a leadership? Right? What qualities should leaders emphasize to cultivate a connected and engaged team? Probably Oliver, you want to start off for this final question? Then we.
I can. So, I think, okay, there's a few things here. First of all, I do think, people have different leadership styles, but I think if you want to lower stigma for mental health and you want to really get people to use your resources and be very proactive about their mental health care, I think the leaders from the company, they need to lead by example. They need to practice what we call vulnerable leadership. So they need to also, of course, within limitations, right? You don't have to, go into details what you're discussing with your therapist, but you should be open about, especially when you support an employee who has struggles, they're struggling with burnout, that you can, as a leader, also share how, you have in the past overcome perhaps similar challenges, to encourage, to lower the stigma, to give support. That's one thing, right? But generally, I think empathy is very important. So to really put yourself in the shoes of the employee. When people, struggle, they do so for a reason. And often, as humans, we're very quick to make assumptions and label people. That unfortunately lies a little bit within our nature. So you have to be extra cautious to not do that. And leaders should also have their own coaches to work on those blind spots and biases to help them become better leaders as well. And I think, of course, companies should define their core values and hire accordingly. So I think that helps a lot, be it, resilient or empathy could be a company value, and ideally you hire accordingly. But and a good leader to me is also not just keeping the KPIs in check and in focus, but to really focus on the team's well-being and track the well-being, make sure that they put in place opportunities for teams to connect, and so on. Yeah, I think vulnerable leadership is probably a very important quality in this sort of new post-pandemic hybrid kind of work, remote area we're in.
Hiraash, your thoughts?
Yeah, great points. I think one of the things that Oliver touched upon also is how culturally and how certain things have to be instilled. I think this is very important because leaders have to bring this into organizations, right? And I think some of those things, especially when it comes to remote setting, is one of the things is that we today see in the remote, setting. One of the things that we see most of the time is the burnout that happens because you're still figuring out the right mode of operation, because you're at home and you're working throughout, and we've heard this many times that people just can't figure out their boundaries. It's very easy to just continue to work or start early, work from the bed, and you just feel very comfortable working from anywhere. So establishing a culture where there is consciousness around these boundaries, and creating that, instilling that into your culture itself. I think this is something that needs to happen at the leadership level, just like being self-aware about your health, well-being, mental well-being, and being able to sort of also think about that. So one of the things about the whole burnout aspect is making the meeting culture, making sure there is discipline around meeting culture. And in fact, something we also struggle with a lot is having crazy amounts of meetings that you need to deal with. And how do you really create an environment where you can be productive and from not being in so many meetings. Obviously, sitting in meetings all day is not going to help you get anything done. Having the right amount of time to spend with yourself, spend with your teams, and then actually get things done, right? So all of this is very important for a well-functioning organization, no matter what you're working on. So I think it comes culturally, making sure that there is discipline around this. There is trust around a remote setting where you create that trust. People should not feel that have to constantly, validate what they're doing, right? The trust system should give them that space where they feel comfortable, safe to, just do their work, commit to something, and be accountable for it. And just it's nothing new, right? It's just the same stuff you do in work, but commit and then be accountable. But especially in a remote setting, when this trust is shaken and people feel that there's trust is not, it creates an unsafe space for them to work. So meeting cultures through creating a trust environment, making sure that accountability is practiced and appreciated. Some of these things are very important to be instilled into the culture, so that a remote setting. And of course, we spoke a lot about the human connection and the working async, which is the other aspect of it, right? It's I found it to be very difficult to create that environment. Because it takes, of course, just like culture and values, like you said, right? The values you have for the values, rather than expecting everybody just practice your values. If you have a set of values and you find the people who align to those values, that's when it actually works. And I think even working async is a similar thing. It is not something that everybody can easily practice. So I think if you are building a remote setting team and remote company, I think also it's important to see that people are comfortable working async, taking on, being able to do a lot of reading, do a lot of writing. Even recording videos or voice, this is also fine. I mean, we've seen that some people practice this, which is great. Yeah, but I feel these are some of the things that come from a leadership perspective, instill the culture so that you create that environment. Hope that was helpful.
Just to relate to the accountability part, I thought that's a very, very important point you made, Hiraash. So what we do at Intellect in our teams is that we kick off the week Monday morning. We have a stand-up within the departments, and first of all, in remote teams, that's excellent because everyone gets to see each other. We have a quick catch up. How was the weekend? And you're not forced to share, but people can share about what they experienced for 10 minutes or so, and then we go through the sub teams and what are the priorities for the week, so the team is aware what's going on in the other teams, and we close off the week with how things have been going. But that way, you are putting out to the team what you're working on, and the team can hold you accountable, right? I think that's very, very important. And the other thing I wanted to add, I was just reading this book by Ray Dalio, Principles, which is very, very, I think, quite well known to a lot of managers. And he really advocates, and that relates quite closely to me as well, is that hierarchies in this modern remote day and age, of course, there's always going to be some hierarchy, right? But if you want to engage remote workforces, you need to create a safe space virtually where the best ideas win, and where you invite, where you have a culture of feedback ideally as well, where you can truly learn from when things don't go well. So don't just celebrate your successes, but also look at when things go wrong, but do it in a safe way. And again, that's the vulnerable leadership I said earlier. I think it's very important for people leaders, when they do screw up, that they can own it and role model as well how they deal with it, rather than finger point and sort of be defensive about it. Because that way you're inviting, healthy debates and discussions. But of course, I agree, don't have end-to-end, back-to-back meetings, all day, and then, just be stuck in meetings. Be purposeful. But yeah, I think that's just something also to keep in mind, that you create a culture where you engage your team around the best ideas and feedback and learning from it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Hiraash. Thank you all. I think there were a lot of great insights and points that people managers could definitely follow. to have a connected and engaged team. So guys, that's all for today's webinar. To everyone who joined us, thank you. If you missed anything or just want to rewatch this session, don't worry. Our recording will be available soon. Thank you again for joining us today. We can't wait to see you at our next event. Until then, stay safe and have a great rest of the week.